Hi, this is Alex with another simple develop video. Today I want to show how to blend two exposures. Very basic technique to eliminate lens flare where I captured two frames, one shielding the light source that was causing the flare and the other with the flare in place but the sky that I can use, and put these two frames together. Obviously this technique requires using the camera on a tripod, and what I'd also like to point out is it is very beneficial to use manual exposure mode here. I mention this because I normally use aperture priority, meaning the camera will automatically determine the correct exposure time based on the aperture that I choose. And because I have a very bright light source in here that I'm covering here, this would lead to two different exposures. So here I exposed for that light source in manual mode, then covered the light source and made another exposure so that the two exposures look absolutely identical. Here 1/350th of a second and 1/350th of a second. Of course they do not actually look 100% identical because you can see the negative effects of the lens flare here in form of a reduced contrast and color distortions, color distractions, and some rays here that are entirely absent from the picture where I shielded the light source here. I'd like to mention that at 38mm I did have my lens hood on the lens, and I would always recommend that, of course, but this is just too wide an angle and the position of the sun here in the frame was just unfortunate. Of course, this is just an example picture. But before I actually combine these two exposures in Photoshop, I want to make a couple of adjustments, and this is really nice in Lightroom using the batch editing features. I select both frames, you see they both get highlighted in the film strip down here as well. When I switch to develop, both of these pictures stay highlighted, so both are still active. And I have my auto sync on down here, which means any edit that I make to this frame will also be applied to the second frame. Because I exposed this frame for the highlights, I choose exposure correction now, and then I recover those highlights. And similarly, I want to raise the shadows a good amount already, so that the whole exposure will be more even if I come back later after blending for further editing. At this time it's also a good idea to make some color adjustments if they're necessary, because we're still working with the raw data here and can use the full potential of raw data to make free adjustments to the temperature and tint. Maybe I'd like this to be a little bit warmer, so I choose Adobe's Daylight preset, which is 5500K. And maybe I want just a little bit more of a magenta tint because that looks more pleasing. What I can also do here in this auto sync mode is to clean up any sensor dust spots. Not that it would make sense in this instance here, because I only have one resulting frame, or one source frame actually, but I could use this if I were to blend panoramas. If I have sensor dust spots, I could remove them just from one frame, and this would automatically synchronize to all the other frames in the panorama, so I don't multiply the sensor dust spots in the final panel. If I have made all my adjustments that I want to make here, it's time to switch to Photoshop to put these two images together. With a right click here, I can choose Edit In and Open as Layers in Photoshop. In Lightroom Cloud, you don't have this option. There you would have to export the two files as TIFF, ideally 16-bit, to preserve all the data, and then manually open these two documents in Photoshop and layer them. In Lightroom Classic, you have the advantage of having this menu item open as layers in Photoshop, and Lightroom passes the files directly over to Photoshop. Here they come, loading. Here's my frame with my hand in the picture, and there's the one with the flare. In this situation, I of course want to just recover the sky, and that will be the much easier approach here. So I move that bottom layer to the top, and that's the visible one then. It doesn't really seem like it's necessary, but in these situations I always like to select both frames here with click and shift click, and then from my edit menu choose auto align layers, because this will make sure that there's really a perfect alignment. And you see there's a tiny bit of a line appearing here at this edge where Photoshop just shifted that frame ever so slightly to make sure that the two are perfectly aligned. You can see this aligns indeed very nicely. Now I can click on that first frame here at the top, add the layer mask to it. It appears in white, which means it conceals everything from the frame that is underneath here. In order to reveal something from this frame, I have to paint in some black with this color here. If I make a mistake, I can switch back and forth between white and black to simply paint white back in and conceal the part that I accidentally revealed. I can also make this switch by pressing the X key on my keyboard. I already have the brush selected. Maybe I want to make the brush a little bit bigger. I can use the square arrows on my keyboard to do that. And I brush my sky here to remove my hand from the frame. And that's all it takes. And I want to visualize what I just brushed here just to verify. And I use the backslash key to show this visualization. And you see I painted a little bit too much in here, and I want to fix that. Curiously, when you activate this visualization, Photoshop automatically switches to white here from the black that I just painted in. I don't know if that's a bug or a feature, but it caught me by surprise the first time I did this. So I make my brush a little bit smaller, and I fix where I had overshot here into this foreground area, because this area too was affected by my lens flare a little bit. I can hide the overlay. Now this is looking fine. All that's left to do is go to the layer menu and choose flatten image, which will condense these two separate layers into a new image, which I can now save. All I need to do, since those two frames came from Lightroom originally, is to choose save. I don't need to use export or save as or save a copy. I can simply choose save. Photoshop changes the file name automatically here, saves the file, and after that I can quit Photoshop. I'll end up back in Lightroom, and here is the finalized file. You see that I have these two already in a stack, so I can simply use that resulting file, put it into the stack. What I also do is I click on that number to move the final blended file to the top of the stack, and I can collapse the stack. Here's a little insight in my workflow. I mark component images of blending or focus stacking or panoramas with a 1-star rating, which helps me to remember that I use these frames for something else, even though in this situation it would be fairly obvious. And then I give the final image a higher rating, and I can collapse that stack, so I only see the final image in my catalog and library view. One thing to pay attention to is that any metadata preset that was applied to the original frames does not survive this treatment. So I need to choose my appropriate metadata preset here. I just set some copyright information this way. Last not least, what I also want to do is perhaps rename this file and just put the name that I had used for the original files. If I wanted to, I could go back to my develop module now add a little bit of clarity, maybe increase the contrast, work further on the colors. And oh right, I almost forgot, I need to go to my crop tool and crop just a little bit to avoid these blank areas that were the result of my aligning. Maybe I crop a little bit more in here to avoid this very bright area anyway. Then I close it, and here is my absolute masterpiece, beautifully blended desert image. I hope you liked this video. Very basic technique, very quick and simple way to produce a beautiful clean image without the distracting artifacts of lens flare, if there's no other way to avoid the lens flare in the field, of course. And you know that you should always use your tripod, right? That's it from me for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.